Thank you so much for accepting our request to be a speaker. I wish you were here and we make this talk face to face in person in Istanbul. Uh, I want to introduce Ömer Bey Albayrak shortly. He completed his doctoral degrees at Galatasaray University in Istanbul, and his areas of academic interest include German idealism, romanticism, philosophy of history, and the philosophy of translation. He currently works as a faculty member in the philosophy department at Istanbul 29 May University, 29 Mayıs Üniversitesi, as an associate professor. And he is currently a guest researcher at Goethe University in Frankfurt. Among his publications, I can mention his books, which are kind of fortune in Turkish about German idealism. He has two books. I say their Turkish names. Alman idealizminde aşkınlık ve tarihsellik. And Alman düşüncesinde sanat ve aşkınlık. And he is also a translator from French and German and English into Turkish. He translated Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Roland Barthes, Henry Heine, Claude Lévi-Strauss into Turkish. Today, he is going to talk about his ongoing project about art and transcendence in German thought. His talk is called From Caspar David Friedrich to Anselm Kiefer, Romantic Landscape Painting, Melancholia and Fascism. Thank you so much. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Greetings from Frankfurt, first of all. Before beginning my presentation, I want to thank the head of department, Professor Erdal Yılmaz, and faculty members of Marmara University Philosophy Department for having me, and also to the audience who are present now listening to me. And okay, today I want to talk about several topics, but I hope the link between them will be not difficult to follow. I will first talk about, in general, the presentation traces a critical dialogue in German art from 18th century, end of 18th century, beginning of 19th century, and from the first half of, or second half of the 20th century, German art, and examining how the romantic landscape tradition in the 18th and 19th century, epitomized by Caspar David Friedrich, the most famous German landscape painter, was radically reinterpreted and reappropriated critically by Anselm Kiefer in the aftermath of the Second World War. In order to do this, I have to talk about first the landscape painting briefly, about the concept of landscape painting, about its transformation in a brief way. And then I'm going to talk about the German romantic landscape painting with its main ideas and themes. And then we will look at some paintings of Caspar David Friedrich, first concerning the natural landscapes, and then in the second part, his landscapes that concern the historical themes of the German culture, specifically between two periods. The first one is at the beginning of the first or second centuries, and the second part about in the 19th century, about Caspar David Friedrich's own time, with its historical developments. And then in the last part, I'm going to talk about Anselm Kiefer's critical reappropriation and dialogue through his own landscape paintings. And I hope it will not be a boring presentation. And I have brought many visual material. I hope that will help us to reflect and understand what was going on in the German mind at that period. Anyway. Okay, first about landscape, the concept of landscape and the landscape painting. When we say landscape painting, the first thing that comes to mind is the representation of nature in painting. Mountains or woods, forests, anything, rivers, anything you like. But that doesn't mean that nature as landscape was is also present in painting and art from its beginning. We see representation of nature in paintings in every century, but they are not all landscape paintings. The word landscape, the German word for landscape means is Landschaft, and it means not only view landscape, but also it means also terrain, land, countryside, and it implies that landscape is nature not in itself as nature, but nature conceptualized as human property or a part of human world. And although we see, as I said, representation of nature in paintings, before the 16th century, this representation or the presence of nature in paintings does not tell us anything about nature in itself, or the nature does not play a role in the painting other than serving as a background. It is not part of the narrative of the painting. It does not add anything to it. It does not point to anything other than being a background. But during this 16th century, we see a transformation in this mode of presentation of nature in painting. And we see from the beginning of the 16th century to the end of the 16th century, the transformation which brings the landscape, the nature, to the forefront and conceptualizes it as something more than a background. To illustrate this, I want to share some examples. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, this one, The Baptism of Christ by Joachim Patinier from 1510-20. This is an example from a religious painting. As you can clearly see, sorry. The theme, the subject is in front. We see the baptism of Christ, and in the background we see the nature with rivers and mountains and rocks, but it doesn't play any role in that adds something to the subject of the painting. It is just there, so to speak. It is just a background so that the subject is in front of some background, but the nature here could be anything else, but it could change. It would change nothing at all. Another example from historical painting. This is from Albrecht Altdorfer, the famous Battle at Issus from 1529. This work depicts the Battle of Issus at the 4th century BC between Alexander the Great and Darius III of Persia. Here again, we see in the front the battle happening, and in the background we see a very nice landscape with sea and sky, etc. But again, there is nothing that we can say about this background that adds to the subject of the picture. It does not have anything to do with it. It is just a background. 50 years later, the same century, but this time from Brueggel's, one of the famous famous paintings, landscape. Here we see in 1565, we see the nature and landscape the subject of the painting. It is not a background here. It is the theme. It is the subject. In technical terms, the nature is not a parergon anymore, which means a background frame. It is the ergon itself, the work itself, the subject itself. And another ironic example could be again from Bruegel, landscape with fall of Icarus. So this is a mythological subject, the fall of Icarus, famous subject. But sorry, if you want to see where Icarus in this painting is, you'll have to look hard because it is almost invisible. It is in the right corner, right down. You see only the legs of Icarus falling into the sea. The main subject is the parergon now, the background, almost invisible, but the landscape, the nature is itself with the peasants in their daily life is in the front. It is the main subject of the painting. So, and in the early 16th century, again, we see Albrecht Dürer. He prepared a book called German Landscapes, and we see the landscape as the landscape. It is not something serving as a background anymore. It is not something that is simply there, but also it is German landscape. He depicts the landscapes of his own country, and it is not there just to be there. Evet, also in this context, Goethe mentions in one of his texts that painting only began to turn towards nature as a primary subject after liberating itself from its dogmatic past. The dogmatic past we have seen in through these examples, either as the background for biblical or mythological subjects, or either as the background for historical subjects. Now, with 16th century, we see nature beginning to be represented as landscape. And in this sense, again, landscape is not nature in itself. It is a sublimation of something left behind. Why? Because if you want to have a landscape painting on your wall in your house, only when you don't live in that landscape anymore. With the urbanization in Europe, the nature as nature is something left behind. It is something that belongs to the past, and landscape painting or its representation as landscape in the painting just is a sublimation, or maybe in Hegelian terms, an Aufhebung, again in the sense, the sublimation of nature in human world. With this background, we can now come to the second part of my presentation, the romantic landscape painting and its relation to the romantic idea of art. In order to do that, we have to first talk about briefly about the concept of the sublime. Other than the concept of beauty, the concept of sublime is very important, as you all know, in the 19th century, 18th and 19th century aesthetic thought, especially in German aesthetic thought. And its theoretical foundations, we can, in the modern period at least, we find in Edmund Burke, in British guy Edmund Burke, and the second most important text about it is Kant's, obviously, Third Critique, where he discusses the ideas of mathematical and dynamic sublime. The first text about the sublime is attributed to Longinus and dates from the 1st century, Perihypsos on the sublime, but it is not our subject here. But the main idea is almost always the same for Edmund Burke. The sublime is the productive of the strongest emotion, and it is associated with terror, obscurity, and wasteness. When we look at Immanuel Kant's account of the sublime, Kant argues that no natural object is itself sublime, obviously. We always give examples from nature when we talk about the sublime, but these natural events are never sublime in themselves because they are always happening in the limits of our understanding and in the limits of time and space. So, a big mountain, however big it is not itself sublime, but it is the emotion in us that it creates. It is called sublime. We are feeling that sublimity of it, but the object itself is not. The feeling arises from within us when faced with boundless nature, overwhelming our senses and reason, and pointing to a transcendent faculty within the mind. So, through the concept of the sublime, we can think about the transcendent element both objectively and subjectively, which means subjectively also. So, when we see a threatening event, a natural event, for example, it threatens our physical existence. But for Kant, this threat on our physical existence helps us or creates the possibility of our to think about our subjective spiritual aspect, which can overcome this physical aspect of ours. And from there on, he goes on to the ethical function of this feeling of or experience of the sublime. Objectively, it means that the nature is not, again, only nature itself, but it is something more. It points to something transcendent, something, in Christian terms, obviously, within this context, it makes us to transcend the boundaries of nature to arrive at the experience of transcendence, of something that will bring us together with the godly element in nature. And in this context, the nature itself becomes the symbol not only of something living as living beings, living nature, but something more than that, something metaphysical, something transcendent. And this is very important for the Western painting and Christianity as well, because as we well know, for Christianity, the nature and the body as belonging to nature was never considered as something sublime. On the contrary, it was something to be afraid of because it is the domain of the devil, because it's the domain of the sin. But with romantic landscape painting, as the result of this transformation of nature as landscape, the nature itself begins to be thought as the symbol or as the representation or as the presence of the God, presence of the transcendent itself. And this is also another interesting point concerning this Christian historical background. So, the romantic arts and philosophy is, or one of the aims of romantic art and philosophy is to think about nature with its transcendent aspect and to represent it as the appearance of the transcendent. When we talk about the romantic, German romantic movement, we have to say that it is different from British or French romantic movements, in that in romantic movement in Germany, we see a very strong philosophical aspect, which we don't see in French or British or English romanticism. They are just schools of art, literature mainly. But in German romantic movement, we see a very strong philosophical thought, which is represented by the works of Schlegel brothers, but especially by the works of Friedrich Schlegel, who was one of the theoreticians of the Romantic philosophy. So in this context, the German Romantic philosophy is one of the two main philosophical schools after that formed themselves after Kant. The first one is, as we know, the German idealism, and the second one is German Romanticism. In this respect, a periodization of German Romantic movement is necessary to understand these different aspects of it. And I use Elizabeth Millen Zeibert's periodization in her book Friedrich Schlegel and the Emergence of Romantic Philosophy, very useful. Briefly, I will mention it. So the early Romantic period is between 1794 and 1802, which is it's a period where the philosophical reflection and activity is very active. The second Middle Romantic period is from 1808 to 1815, where we see literature and painting and arts in general, artistic activity is predominant. And the late Romantic period is from 1815 to 1830, and this is characterized by the political aspect of it, or mainly as a political movement, as Romanticism. And we will see these, the first period, the philosophical aspect, we will see now, and then through the paintings of Friedrich, we will see the second period, and think about the second period of this movement. And last part of this Romantic period will be also reflected in the paintings of Friedrich as well. Okay, so for German Romantics and for Friedrich Schlegel and other philosophers and artists as well, the absolute or the divine could never be fully represented as itself, as the divine or as the absolute. Philosophy and art could only point to it, just point to it, to an aspect of it, but never fully grasp it as it is in itself. And art can make it sensuously present, but only an aspect, a finite aspect of it, because we cannot grasp the infinite as infinite itself, but only as through its finite aspects. So art for Friedrich Schlegel was to become the new mythology for the modern world, and serving the function religion once did in the past. So this main idea led to two key concepts of the Romantic philosophy. First, the concept of fragment. The world is also the empirical world, the sensual world that we see and live in, that we inhabit, is a world of finite things. So it is a world of fragments only. And each artwork also is a fragment, but it is a fragment of the totality of the whole of the absolute, which points to the absolute. The second one is the potentiation, concept of potentiation, in German Potenzierung, and this is also one of the main concepts of Schelling, who is considered as an idealist philosopher, who was also in close connection with brother Schlegel. He married the ex-wife of August Wilhelm Schlegel. They were so close, not only theoretically, but socially as well. The Potenzierung in Schelling's middle and late works, we see the potencies, the concept of Potenzierung and potency as one of the central concepts of his idea. Anyway, this potentiation, what is this? It is the artist, or we can also call him the magician. According to the Romantics, there were not a very big difference between them. The artist or the magician transforms finite objects into signs of the infinite, multiplying meaning as an infinite series of mirrors. If you set two mirrors against to each other, You know that they each reflect themselves and it goes into the infinite. There's no end to it. So the artwork as a finite object will represent the infinite, although it is a finite object. It will be the sign of the infinite. It will tell us infinitely many meanings and aspects of meaning. And for example, in the art of painting, Friedrich's use of misty mountains, for example, serves this function, enlarging the landscapes and stimulating the imagination. So again, what we see now on the screen, the mist gives us a feeling of unboundedness. There are no clear-cut limits. The finite and the infinite, or the limit between the finite and the infinite, becomes blurred. Again, we can also remember Novalis' main idea, one of the famous poets of the period. The world must be romanticized. In this way, we can rediscover its original meaning. Romanticizing is nothing other than the raising to a higher power. The raising to a higher power is what we call this potentiation already. So again, the main idea that the finite nature is the embodiment of infinity, of the sublime, of the divine. Okay, the first example that we see now, Friedrich's winter landscape with church from 1811. Also, Friedrich also says that the divine is everywhere, even in the grain of sand. So it is not important whether the subject is in itself divine or not. Even a grain of sand is divine because it is the embodiment of the divine. So his landscapes are not mainly, let's say, mere landscapes, but meditations on human experience and this experience of transcendence. To illustrate this idea, to the experience of transcendence, the idea of the experience of transcendence through art, I want to read an excerpt from a letter. It is a little bit long, but I think it represents perfectly what they had in mind. This excerpt is from the letter, from a letter of Philip Otto Runge, another famous romantic painter, also landscape painter, who lived between 1777 and 1810. In a brief to his, in a letter to his brother Daniel, he says, quote, "I lost myself in astonishment. I could no longer think. I sat before my painting. The things I first thought about it as they arose within me, the feelings that arose within me with every look at the moon or every sunset, the spirits arising in me, the destruction of the world, the distinct consciousness of all these things, of what I had felt about them for as long as I can remember, passed before my soul. This unchanging consciousness transferred into the eternal within me. Behind these golden mountains, you can only sense God, but you are certain of His existence. What you feel in your eternal soul is also eternal. What you draw forth and create from your soul is not transient. Art, if it is to be eternal, must spring from this source." End of quote. So even in front of his own painting, not just the painting of someone else, but his own painting, when he looks at his own painting, this experience of transcendence, this feeling of transcendence fills his soul, and the destruction of the world here means the destruction of the world of the visible world, of the world of senses. The destruction of the sensible world brings about the experience of the infinite, or the sublime, or the divine aspect of our existence, or the God. Anyway, so the unchanging consciousness, in contrast to the changing consciousness of empirical things, again, and the terminology also takes very much from the Fichtean philosophy as terminology, this unchanging consciousness, but I'm not going to go into detail here. So this, when we look at this winter landscape with church as a key example, what do we see? We see I think with the cursor I can point to it. There's a human figure here. Is collapsed against a rock. Very here we see his crutches, which can be also interpreted as reason and science and philosophy. They are discarded before him. He is just sitting there against the rock. And here it is very difficult to see, but we see cross, the Christ crucified Christ figure, and it is almost invisible because it is almost as one with the tree behind it. So the divine and the natural are so closely linked together, and this wanderer, this guy who could come to this point with his crutches, with his technology, let's say, with some tools, but but from this point on, there's nothing to go with. There's no way to go with these tools. He just is there with together with the divine element in nature, which shows itself in nature, and also in the background we see a silhouette of a cathedral, and the figure of the cathedral and the form of the trees here in front. There's a parallelism between them. They're almost identical. In the next painting, you will see this identity more clearly. And in between the divine, the silhouette of cathedral and the natural, we see again the mists, which blur the limit between the sublime and the empirical or the sensual. So then we have the cross in the mountains. Again, as I've said already, this here, the trees and the church are almost intertwined. We cannot easily say which part belongs to nature and which part belongs to the church or the spiritual. And in the middle of them too, we see again here Christ on a cross. The nature is always with the divine or with the transcendent again. And the most famous painting of Romanticism and of one of the most famous paintings of the history of painting in general as well, The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. Here we see the absolute subject of the idealism of Fichte, maybe, or again the romantic subject. And another important point, these figures that we see in these paintings, they're always looking away from us. We never see their faces. This they called in German Rückfigur. There we always see the back of their bodies, and this is a very conscious choice made by the romantics, because they want the painter wants the audience, wants us to identify ourselves with the figure looking at the landscape in front of him, so that after this identification, we will contemplate the landscape as if we are there, as if we are the figure in the painting. And this, the experience of this contemplation and will bring us another identity. I think this identity is that the landscape becomes the portrait of our inner nature. So there is this distinction in the art of painting, landscape and portrait. Landscape depicts the outer nature. The portrait depicts our inner nature, our character. But I thing in the romantic landscape painting through this rook figure, through these figures that we don't see their faces. This identity, there is the identity between two separate or maybe opposite species, genres of painting, landscape painting and portrait painting is established. The landscape becomes our inner world, our experience of it, so it becomes our portrait. But this is a speculative interpretation of the romantic painting. Okay, so this is the sublimation of nature, sublimation of it to transcendence, to the divine. But there's another aspect of this sublimation in romantic painting, in landscape painting and the paintings of Friedrich, which is the historical aspect of the German people. This one, a grave of ancient heroes, and the years in 1810s and 1820s, between 110s and 20s, there were the wars called against the French armies of the German armies, which they always lost. And this wars, the period of wars, also was very fertile material for the artists, for Friedrich or for other artists as well. So here we see the sublimation of not only nature but of the past as well. So the grave of ancient heroes from 1823, we see again this sublime nature, the rocks, and as if illuminated by a divine light, we see the grave of their heroes, the fallen heroes in the wars against French armies. So here, the chasseur in the forest. The chasseur means the French soldier. Here, this figure here is the French soldier, and there's also another parallelism between the Romans and the French Napoleonic armies. The Roman Empire, or the first century AD, there was this war of Varus between the German tribes and Roman armies, and the German tribes defeated Roman armies in the forests. It was the biggest defeat of the Roman Empire throughout its history. And when they fought against the Napoleonic armies, the German nation remembered this period in the first century AD, where they defeated the Roman armies, and they identified the Napoleonic armies with the Roman armies. And Romans means civilization, technology, and universalism, as French Republic meant civilization, universalism, technology in the 18th century. So the Germans identified themselves with these Teutonic tribes from the first century who fought against the Romans, and also this was the beginning of the German nationalism as well. So here we see the French soldier looking like a Roman soldier as well, and this is the here we see the raven, black raven, as the symbol of death, awaiting death in the forest. And if you look at the forest, we don't see any more a sublime forest, a divine forest, but a very dark forest, a bringer of death. We will see as soon as we look at the painting, we see that this soldier will die in the forest. So this is a reference to the first century again, and this parallelism is very clear. So this painting creates a continuous historical narrative. As we say, this links contemporary battles against the French to ancient Germanic or Teutonic resistance against Rome, and the forest itself becomes a symbol of an ancient mystical German identity. This German identity will swallow the foreign invader, in this case here the French. And it should also be noted that forests and trees have always been sacred in German culture, not just in pagan times, but after the Christianity as well. Okay, now we will come to the last part concerning Anselm Kiefer and his critical dialogue with his artistic predecessors. But before that, we have to say some things about Melancholia. The Melancholia, the concept of Melancholia, I use it in the Freudian sense, in the sense that Freud used it in his work Mourning and Melancholia. Mourning, according to Freud, is a successful process of grieving a loss, healing the ego, and reattaching to new objects. You lose someone, something, an ideal. It may also be an ideal, a political ideal, or someone you loved so much. When you lose that person or that thing, you go into the work of mourning. You have to heal yourself and then go on with life, so to speak. What about melancholia? Melancholia is a pathological state or a failed mourning, we can also say, a mourning which could not succeed. It's a pathological state where the ego, identifying with the lost object, becomes consumed by self-loathing and oscillates between idealization and debasement, or love or hate. In the state of melancholia, you cannot go on with life and leave the loss behind yourself. You identify yourself with the loss, and then you develop a double relationship to the lost object: hate and love, sublimation and debasement. And with respect to history, it becomes, for example, when Nietzsche talks about our attitude towards history, when it talks about this monumental history, where you sublime the history. When you say, oh, they were sublimate the history, they say they were all heroes. But this sublimation of history is also a debasement of today, of the present. So this love-hate relationship is a pathological state, and which at the end always leads to destruction and violence, self-destruction and destruction of other objects and people. So, why this theme? The early 19th century Germany suffered profound losses. They had no political unity. They had military defeats, and they lived between Great Britain and France. Great Britain rules the world, briefly speaking, and French Republic is representing the new world, let's say, with its constitution. But in between them, there is no unity which can be called Germany yet. So there have in a sense of cultural backwardness. The whole world goes on, but the German people cannot give an answer or give to response to the demands of modern world. German idealism attempted the work of mourning, building new philosophical systems, we can say, with Fichte's absolute ego, which posits itself as absolute ego, for example. But German Romanticism, I believe, exhibits the structure of melancholia, which cannot deal with this loss. This thinking through fragments is another aspect of it. They cannot achieve a totality of the world. They always think about the fragments, they always have fragments, but totality is forever lost. And also these two philosophical schools can be thought in this respect through their attitude towards the concept of the absolute. For German idealism, we are part of the absolute. So the morning work has succeeded, but for German Romanticism, the absolute is forever lost. So it is the melancholy aspect of this German spirit, we can say. It could not leave its lost glory behind. So they are always thinking about the glory of the first century AD in the 18th century. Instead, it retreated to a mythical, idealized past, sublimating its fragments, whether natural or historical, as we have seen, and expressing a simultaneous grandiosity and despair. Again, as Nietzsche said, the monumental history. Something very great, but this greatness leaves us in despair because we cannot achieve it anymore. This melancholic fixation on the lost whole and the rejection of reason for myth. Instead of reason, they chose myth, would, as critics like Siegfried Kracauer, for example, noted, open a path later exploited by Nazi aesthetics or fascist aesthetics. Okay, now we come to Anselm Kiefer and our first work by him, Besetzungen, Occupations, from 1669. What you see in the picture is obvious enough, I guess, but there are some details as well. If you look at the bottom of the picture, and also here we read Gehen auf Wasser, walking on water. This theme, as you may recall, is reference to Christ's walking on water. This Christian aspect of his miracle. But it is recreated with in the badewanne, zu Hause, in the bathtub, as an ersatz figure, let's say, for the miracle. For this, this is only one picture from a photo series where he gives this Nazi salute in different locations. He traveled through Europe and posed, giving the Nazi salute a historically charged size, but most famous image directly quotes from this one. Again, the parallelism is obvious enough. The wanderer above the sea of fog, and here the wanderer above the sea of water. Let's say the outfits are basically the same, the pants especially. And here he contemplating, again we see the Rücken figure from the back, is replaced by the artist himself. He is Anselm Kiefer himself, and he's doing the Nazi salutes. So, but this is not a salute for propaganda. He was not a Nazi, obviously. And doing this was a very radical provocation at that time, and even today, obviously. It was a radical provocation indeed. It asks, is this the culmination of the romantic ideal? Where did the journey of the German spirit from Friedrich's sublime yearning ultimately lead? From 200 years ago. He wants, Anselm Kiefer wants to force the viewer to confront this uncomfortable question. And as a part of this project, we can also see that he has painted some landscapes as well. These look like the romantic landscape paintings, but in each of them we will see figures that will alienate us, the audience, from the sublimation of the subjects depicted in. So, this winter landscape from 1970, we see again, like in Friedrich's paintings, winter, snow, with trees, but this the snow, the white of the snow is tainted with blood, and the contrast between the white and the blood red is very striking here. And the bloody head lies either on the ground or in the sky as well. It's not very clear where it is, but this ambiguity is also a part of the romantic attitude. Is it the morning or evening? Is it sunset or sunrise? This ambiguity adds to the layers of meaning of the painting. Here as well, it is the head with its throat cut, and the red dots bring the two layers together, the sky, and it also may be a reference to the poem, the Death Fugue, where the poet talks about the graves in the sky, in heavens, meaning the burnt ashes of Jewish prisoners in that camps. Anyway, so this is a critical, let's say, appropriation of the romantic landscape. But it is not only that. It's only example of it. Here we see the historical aspect of the same problem. If this Varus is the name of the again commander of the Roman armies, and the commander of the German tribes were Arminius. He was a Roman soldier, but from German origin. And in the 18th century, the name Arminius was transformed into German and called Hermann. Hermann's Schlacht, the Hermann war. And if you look at from close, you will see the names of Varus here, Hermann here, Sunelda, wife of Hermann. But we see also the names of the German philosophy and spirit and art as well. Fichte, we see here. By the way, Fichte also is the name of a species of pine tree in German. Stefan, Martin, here was Lessing, Kleist. So this is a landscape, but a landscape of German spirit, so to speak, where again forests, nature, and history and the spiritual aspect come together, but in a very critical way, obviously.
Hocam, sorry to interrupt. We are at the end of our time for talking.
Okay,
You can maybe conclude.
I'm almost
Right.
finished. Almost finished. This is the last or before what? Again, okay, we see again Wege der Weisheit, ways of worldly wisdom, which was called used for philosophy in German. Again, we see Hermann Schlacht, war of Hermann Arminius, and the figures of German spirit, philosophers, artists, Schleiermacher, we read here. Again, okay, this is also similar to the previous one. Okay, this is the end of my visual material. Okay, so conclusion. Now I will make it brief. So were Friedrich and the Romantics responsible for Nazism? No. Kiefer's answer is, by the way, very crucial. He engages with these figures because power misused them. He is not saying that Caspar David Friedrich was a Nazi. It would be nonsense. But the Nazi power used these figures, and we have to reflect upon this thing, upon this possibility of usage by these powers. The issue is not assigning blame, but critically examining the cultural and aesthetic patterns that, however poetically, could be misappropriated. The romantic retreat into myth and its melancholic fixation and on a lost, idealized whole contain elements that could be stripped of their critically and inverted into dangerous political tools. Kiefer's work performs this examination, this critical examination. He does not reject the past, but engages in what Friedrich Schlegel advocated. He criticizes poetry through poetry. He criticizes art through art. He uses the very language romantic landscape, its scale, its material, its themes, its methods, to force a process of mourning upon a nation stuck in melancholia, in his view. His art is a refusal to forget, an insistence on carrying the weight of history appropriating the weight of history to ensure that the past is remembered precisely so that it would not be repeated. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you again for having me. I hope this was a very, I hope not boring presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It is our pleasure to hear such a talk and to see how the art and philosophy are intertwined to each other. And I'm sure listeners have some questions. You can use this. You can write, or you can use this tool for questioning, or you can directly ask your question. If you want, I can start with my question. It is actually about the first part of your talk. You mentioned the transformation in the German art happened in 16th century. Landscape become it was only a background before, then it turned into the landscape in the art, in the paper.
Main subject. Yes.
Yeah, main subject. How did it happen? Why can you mention about this transformation?
I believe the main motive behind this transformation is the urbanization and the advancement of capitalism and the urbanization that it brings with itself. For example, if you live in the country, if you're a farmer, you won't feel the need to have a landscape painting to hang on your wall because you live in that landscape. It's not even a landscape. It's not even a sublimated thing. You live on land, you have your farm, you have your animals. It is something that you live upon, or it is something dangerous for you. It belongs to your life. So something belonging to your life, as something belonging to your daily life, you don't need to sublimate it. You don't need to see it in your as a picture. But if you live in the country, well, in a city, then this again, it is like the almost cliche dream of or fantasy of the intellectuals. After years of intellectual activity, we want to reside in a country house, right? To grow tomatoes and so on. So it is I think it's something like that. The more it becomes belonging to past, the more you describe it in in art. You feel the need to describe it in art or represent in art. I think this is the main motivation.
Maybe there can be we can call it melancholia in that way, and it can be related to later understanding of transformation in the art sublime, which you mentioned as melancholia. And we have questions.
Okay.
Yes, Dilek Yargan, could you please ask your question?
I think Müge was before me.
Sorry.
On the chat.
I can go if you will, Müge, if you don't mind.
Up to you.
Please, you first. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this gorgeous representation of this gorgeous painter. Thank you. I would like to ask you that when we compare the British Romanticism to German Romanticism, especially when we compare Constable or Turner with Caspar Friedrich, David Friedrich, I always confuse these names, even though he is my favorite painter. Anyway, so we can see the ruins, right? ruins in his paintings, but not in the British ones. So when you explain that there are melancholia in this German romanticism, and when I see the ruins in Caspar David Friedrich's paintings, I always feel this tranquility or the sublime, as you said. But I never thought that those are the fragments of greatness. So can we take? So my question is that can we take these ruins as the melancholia, as the fragments of greatness? Can we make a parallelism between them, or it is just my somehow foolish interpretation?
No, no, not at all. Exactly as you said. It is not by chance that they also paint ruins of once great buildings or fragments that make us think about a lost period where things were great, things were sublime, things were ideally bigger than our present situation. And in contrast to British romantic painting, for example, we don't see this contrast in British romantic paintings. Or the tension between the finite and the infinite, between the transient and between the absolute. We only see, not only, but we mainly see in Turner's paintings, for example, what Kant calls the dynamically sublime, which frightens us, which shows the greatness of nature, with the grand power of nature, but something we also don't see in British landscape or romanticism is the irony. So the irony between the finite and the infinite, etc. Also this to compare the German romantic paintings with British romantic paintings and romanticism would be very, very interesting in this respect. And also I have in mind to do someday, but if someone does it before me, I would read it happily. It would say very important things, I believe.
Thank you.
Before asking a question on the chat, a friend left, but she asked a question. Müge Hocam, please, you can ask your question. You had one.
Thank you very much. Ömer Hocam, thank you very much for this very rich presentation. I hope to include this in my syllabus of aesthetics class next year. So thank you very much for this very good introduction. It's not an introduction actually. So my question has to do with the concept of nature. So when you first mentioned that so after urbanization, for these people, nature or what is natural becomes something idealized. And initially, my question was, so what do they count as nature? What actually counts as nature? What is the understanding of nature? Because he said, you said, even in a grain of sand, you quoted, I don't know, I lost the.
Yeah, the divine is present even in the grain of sand. Yes.
In the grain of sand, yes. And when they associate nature and divine, what is within the limits of nature? But then, as I listen to you, maybe this is a misunderstanding or not. I mean, I leave it to you to comment. But as I understand further, nature is the name of something idealized, something that cannot be engaged with. Just like maybe history or the past heroes or the past wars, which is also something idealized because it is something that cannot be engaged with. The engagement is emotional or subjective in terms of our ideals or what, I don't know, informs our spirituality perhaps. So like maybe if you could contrast nature, their understanding of nature, and also maybe the current understanding of past, as you I think made the connection.
Well, what nature is, the question of what nature is, I think it can only be answered as transforming that question to what we understand by nature throughout our history of mankind. So, the nature for the Greek people or for the people 2,000 years ago is not the same nature that it is for today after the Galileo and the modern physics, for example, in general. And in Fichte, for example, we read the most striking expressions of this. He says, nature is always something constructed. We always posit nature as the other of humanity, sometimes the other of reason, sometimes the other of spirit, whatever that is at that moment where this separation is being made or this conceptualization is being made. But within the narrower concept of what we have talked about recently, the pantheism of the 18th century in German thought and the philosophy of Schelling plays a very important role in transforming this relation or attitude towards nature. And he problematizes this distinction between man and nature through his pantheist philosophy or his pantheist project. He does not posit nature as the other of human or the absolute other of reason or anything. He just divides, let's say, the absolute as conscious and unconscious, but they are always something that is living, that is an organism. The idea of organism is always present in Schelling, and his view of the nature is fundamentally different from all of the other modern thinkers, from Descartes and so on, but also from other Christian thinkers as well. He does not posit nature as the other of human, but human and nature or conscious activity and unconscious activity. And he wants to uh, think them in their unity, not in their opposition. So as the nature as a living nature, and he does this in a time where the Newtonian physics or the Newtonian the mathematical philosophy of nature is the main idea or presents the main idea of nature. Nature is something that can be mathematically known. It consists of forces and counter forces, and as Galileo said, the book of nature is the language of the book of nature is mathematics. So he wants to bring back this living unity idea of living unity to nature. Sorry. I think the answer to this question must always be historical. In which periods and what is the conception of nature at that period? I think this is one of the important points.
Thank you very much. This was really complementary to what you talk about. And I remember like romanticism is like re-engagement or incorporation of nature, our nature. So thank you very much for this explanation.
Thank you for the question and answer. Ardal Hocam, you have also a question.
But for me, I think there is a question on the chat. Bengüsü ask if you want.
First, we take question here. Then, if we have time, I'm going to chat question.
Okay. Ömer hocam, thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, this this speech opened a new perspective for me to assess actually Kant philosophy and also German idealism. Well, as far as I know, you are an expert on German idealism as well. My question is connection between actually the transformation of the conception of nature in 16th century and also later Kant philosophy. Kant, uh, uh, until this speech, actually, I didn't realize, this transformation of nature in this German horizon. For Kant, uh, nature is not nature in itself, actually. Nature is the totality of objects that is subject to laws created by understanding, Verstand. So then after your speech, I realized actually, and also the landscape painting show us this transformation already start in this horizon. Actually, Kant call his philosophy Copernican revolution, but Copernican revolution in this field already happened. So Kant took just the picture and put this picture into his system. Of course, he created other thing, but nature already start to be conceptualized. Nature was considered as not nature in itself, nature which is conceptualized by human being. Especially we saw in this idea in the painting. For Kant, this transformation really affect Kant philosophy, especially in terms of this point. This is my first question.
Well, it reminded me of Hegel's famous word at the end of his introduction to the principles of philosophy of right, where he says the owl of Minerva begins to fly in the evening, let's say, at the sunset. Which means to say that philosophy always comes too late, comes always after the fact. So during the day, things happen. People kill each other, or people think, or scientists do things, say things about nature and so. And in the evening, where everybody else sleeps, the philosopher starts to think about what all this means for the general idea of humanity and what it all means philosophically. So, in the Kantian understanding of nature, again, also there's when we talk about this transformation about the conception of nature, which begins with urbanization, but which also which is also conditioned by the development of physics and astronomy, again, which we call the Galileo says that it's mathematics and nothing else. So any living organic nature of the nature is then dismissed, and it is also only seen as a mechanical apparatus. Spinoza thinks that way as well. It is only mechanical. It can be mechanically explained through the causality. Kant also accept this. But the interesting point is that when Newton comes on the scene with his concept of force, he was almost unanimously rejected by his contemporaries. Leibniz, for example, so they had other disputes between them, between Newton and Leibniz, on the calculation of infinite small calculations, but this is not the point. But they said, what are you doing? What is this concept of force? You are bringing back into philosophy some metaphysical things that we cannot see, we cannot touch, and this is made after the Enlightenment, after the radical sensualism of Enlightenment. This guy, and he's in English, not French, according to the understanding of that period. The French always do these things, but they were the materialists at the time. But the English guy comes up with the force of concept of force, which no one can see, which no one can touch, taste, hear. It is not something sensible, but it can be calculated through mathematics. So Kant is the only German philosopher who accepts Newtonian way of looking at nature as a mechanical apparatus, let's say. But his third critique, on the other hand, I always thought that if he could write his third critique in the first place, then the first and second critiques would be totally different books when it comes to their contents, but this is not important. In his third critique, he begins to see nature not just as a series of causal relations, but as something organic and understandable through the concept of teleological thinking. This concept of teleology, I think, breaks the limits of Newtonian thinking, a Newtonian framework that was put on nature at the period. And it is not only it's not only the work of Kant, but it is mainly the work of Romantics and some degree the other artists of that period, as again mentioned. The classical or cliche difference between Romantics and Enlightenment says that the romantic philosophy or attitude was just an opposition to rationalism of the Enlightenment. This is not true. Why is it not true? It is because it does not reflect the total painting, the whole picture. The Romantics did not simply say, okay, enlightenment means reason, then we are choosing the other aspect, other side, and we are opposing. No, they were not opposing reason. They were always saying that human being or nature, in another aspect, is not reducible to reason alone. It is a total being which has reason, okay, but which has other aspect as well. Enlightenment rationality reduces human being to reason and nature to rational natural laws, but it is much more than that. This one-sided view was the problem for them. But they were not choosing the other one-sided view. They were aiming at a more total picture of man, and this total picture is, I believe, present in Schelling's philosophy, right, above all other philosophers. I'm not sure if it's answer to your question, but what you have said made me think about these things.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe later I can ask the second one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me read the question on the chat. I'm reading it.
Kadir Hocam, before you read Bengisu's question, there is a short question. They're asking about the term Ömer used for subjectivity of nature. They are asking the word or spelling.
Subjectivity of the nature. I cannot remember what about that was about.
That was in the beginning of the talk. I think you were telling about nature. Maybe it was a German word. I don't know. It was
It is like paragon.
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 That which is at the margin, which is just a background or the frame. Ergon means work in Greek. Parergon is not the work itself, not the subject itself, but which is around it, the framing.
Okay, Bengisu's question. In early Christian art, the nature was merely the background for sacred events. But in German Romanticism, like in Caspar David Friedrich's landscapes, it became a subject in its own right, a space for existential reflection. Nature no longer served representation but revealed human finitude, silence, and the divine. Heidegger too saw art not as a depiction but as an opening of truth, where world and earth come into tension. How might the relation between Friedrich's landscapes and Heidegger's understanding of art be described? Do they reveal similar or different ontological ways in which nature ceases to be a mere object of vision and becomes a, a state of disclosure?
Hmm. Well, one can write a paper about this or to answer this, but I think although Heidegger's terminology is very different from that of the German Romantic period or idealist philosophy, I believe what he sees as the main function of art or painting in this case is not far from what Romantics thought. But I believe the main difference, and this should be, this should not be forgotten. Heidegger does not think in terms of subjectivity. Whereas the German Romantic philosophy or idealist philosophy is always thinking in terms of subjectivity, whether this subjective or this selfhood, whether the self is in nature as creative activity or in human subject as the infinite subjectivity. I believe this, but his Heidegger's concept of being it can also be thought in its relation to Schelling's main idea in his middle and late period that the unforethinkable, the prominence of being to theory or philosophy or to thought, and his critique of Hegelian philosophy mainly, what he calls negative philosophy, and his accent of positive philosophy, which will deal with the real. But again, when he says the real and positive philosophy, he always thinks in terms of subject and object, whereas Heidegger always rejects this division and tries to think beyond this distinction. So the similarities also must be thought with the main conceptual and terminological differences as well.
Maybe just something came to my mind. A relation can be established on the ground that Heidegger's philosophy is kind of close to fascism, Nazism. Maybe there can be a relation with the topic.
Don't provoke.
That would also be, I did not want to, this would be a low-hanging fruit, as they say, which would then obliterate all the other critics about and on Heidegger. But the philosophical aspect of this political problem may be also thought with in relation to Heidegger's almost let's say insistence of to be in relation with being itself beyond all representations, with the thing in itself. Always his obsession with the thing in itself in the guise of being, I would say, this is my interpretation, by the way, makes him closer to a fascist reading than his Nazi engagement in his time, I believe. which is this obsession with being itself beyond all representative thinking, beyond all Hegelian, let's say, or idealist post-Kantian framework. His insistence of having a relation to being in itself philosophically makes him more akin to fascism than his political engagement in 33.
Mhm.
This was maybe for me the main political philosophical problem is this, not his being a rector of the university at 33.
Thank you. If there is no more questions, we can conclude our philosophy.
Actually, I have
Yeah.
I have a clarification question, Ömer Hocam. I don't really completely understand the fragmentary part, melancholy and political situation in Germany in the first part of 20th century. Can you clarify a little bit these things? Maybe my second question will not be need to ask.
Okay. Some things I'm going to say might be repetition of what I already said, but I'll try to make them brief. Any repetitions? So at the beginning of the after the First World War, let's say, to be more specifically, Germany was defeated by the European forces, let's say, but these European forces, mainly France and Great Britain, were the main leaders, main actors of the modern world in Europe. Whereas Germany, there was no political unity which could be called Germany at that period. It could only be achieved in 1850s. Today we say that Germany is the land of industry, but it was also not true in the middle of the 19th century. It was also to be achieved by the end of the 19th century. So it was mainly an agrarian society. There were no political unity. Princes and some big, powerful kings, Prussia, Kingdom of Prussia, for example, one of them. But there was no political entity called Germany. So this is this is the political aspect of the problem. But there are other problems as well. There were problems for philosophers and artists. For example, some artists discuss the, the following. So why can't we write tragedies like the England, the British and the French can do? Why can't we write anything? Why can't we create anything universally recognized as artworks? But by the middle of the the beginning and middle of the 18th century and 19th century, I believe it was Marx who stated that very clearly. Germany had no political unity, had no economy, so they only had philosophy. And the political activity and unity was done by the French. So Marx says that his own theory is one of the sources. His own theory is the French politics and British economy, theory of economy, because the British ruled the world economically. But the only thing that Germans had philosophy, because there were no other aspect thing as well. So they had to build a nation. When Fichte talks about the infinite subject or the absolute subject, he is not talking about the individual subject, or not only as individual subject, but also as the German nation as a subject which posits itself, which is not posited by other forces, but by itself. So which is what makes its absoluteness. So they needed to. They only had the idea to develop. So the idealism, the philosophy of idealism, was the development of that idea. It was a German philosophy because it had to deal with the problems of the German spirit at that time. When we come, so in the 19th century, they were defeated by France. And then again, as I said, they could only have their political unity by the end of the 19th century. But again, 15 years later, or 20 years later, after the First World War, they were defeated again. So they were always this idea of German greatness to be realized, but couldn't be realized because of other enemies, etc., etc. They couldn't react or respond to the demands of the modern world. They could not be a nation state. They could not have their when you read Fichte's other texts, other than his Wissenschaftslehre, he'll see that his program of a closed commercial state, which describes today's China almost identically. How can a nation state be possible with its closed economical system? Just briefly, I'm not going to go into detail. So they have this feeling of backwardness. They want to, but they also. This is why they remember or rediscover the past's glorious events, which is again the first century AD, the Battle of Varus. But they also think of Luther as a national figure who was the creator of the modern German language by translating the Bible into German language. He had to choose a dialect because there was maybe hundreds of dialects of German language at that time. He had to choose one. The dialect he chose became today's standard German, Hochdeutsch, as they say, High German. So he was he was not only the founder of the Protestant church, but he was also the founder of German language. And the first unity, the Romantics would say at that time, the first unity of German people was established in language. This is why German art gave its most perfect or famous works in literature, poetry, theater. Think about Goethe, think about other romantic period of writers. So the German people wanted to exist as a nation, but for them it was always an ideal, and that ideal could not be achieved. Like the Romantics thought that the absolute cannot be achieved. It can only be, it was lost, it is in the past. It can only be pointed at. And this is also why they depict ruins of great buildings. We only have ruins of it, but not the greatness and not the great buildings. It existed in the past. They cannot project something into future because they don't have that power in their hands. They just had to develop the idea. And that idea, being an idea, could never be realized because it is an idea. But this tension characterizes the romantic thought, I believe, in all its aspects. And it's in contrast to idealism. For idealism, we are always in the a part of the absolute. But for romantics, the absolute is always already the past, and we can only remember it or only point at it. So But this fragmentary existence or this fragmentary state of things, in contrast to this never attainable ideal, creates this feeling of melancholy.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your answer, and it was a pleasure to hear such a nice talk and nice questions. And we
Pleasure
are
is
looking
mine.
forward to reading your book on this issue, which you work on. And it is the end of our philosophy talks, 34 of Marmara University Philosophy Department. And hope to see you soon in our next talk. Have a good day. Schönen Tag.
Thank you very much. Again, it was a pleasure for me and for this
Thank you. Thank you so
always
much.
a conversation. Thank you.